The webinar today is about Edward Said. Uh, the idea is that his work as a prominent figure in post-colonial studies, his work reflects highly on today's theoretical uh, uh, positions and narratives, even after his death in the age of globalization. My aim in this paper would be to is an ambitious aim to reevaluate the effectiveness of Edward Said's arguments about Orientalist discourses and counter-discursive alternatives he suggests. So what Edward Said does is that he, in 1978, he produced his remarkable work, Orientalism, and in it he criticized post-colonial imperialist narratives and how they uh, hegemonize and coerce colonized people and their narratives and discourses. So they not only portray their narratives and their sciences and their discourse as superior to that of the colonized people. Uh, Orientalism also uh, prevents these peoples from producing their own narratives under different guises and different rubrics. The idea, of course, in particular, what I'm interested here is challenging the perception that one former colonized subject like Edward Said moves to the formerly established colonial center or colonial metropolis, such as New York or London, New York in Said's case, whether or not he is able to escape all of the impervious aspects of colonialism and imperialism, particularly in narrative and discourse. So, is it possible for a subject who was originally from the peripheries to reproduce colonial or imperial or Orientalist narrative and discourses about his former homeland or other locations in the periphery east? This is my aim here, and the approach would be to compare or to combine the analysis of Said's theories and theoretical frameworks, along with his narratives and representations. Because throughout his work in the question of Palestine, for example, a large book produced in the 80s, and covering Islam, and After the Last Sky in particular, these are narratives that are descriptive and representational in their majority. They describe or try to produce or reconstruct a counter narrative to that produced by Western media in the 20th century. So that is my aim, to look at Said not just as a theorist who is prominent within post-colonial studies, but also as a theorist who is located, who is countering Orientalist and colonialist or imperialist at this age, imperialist apparatuses from within the West, whether that is acceptable and whether it's possible to escape all of the negativities it associates with colonialism and imperialism, and chiefly Orientalism. So Edward Said, who died fairly recently in 2003, was one of the leading figures in post-colonial theory. described by Robert Young and Ella Shuhat and Bill Ashcroft, among others, and Patrick Williams also as the founder of postcolonial studies and the founder, or one of the founders of postcolonial discursive analysis. And he was described also by many as one of the holy trinity of postcolonial studies, along with Homi Bhabha and Spivak. Although he constantly distanced himself from both, as he had issues with both Marxism and feminism to some extent. So, of course, it's obvious that Edward Said had a huge amount of work produced, around 30 books and a huge array of articles, those written in Al-Ahram and Sharq al-Awsat, among other publications. So first of all, I want to quickly discuss some of the essential definitions that we need to address before going into the paper. So Edward Said believes, as this definition from Orientalism explains, that an Orientalist or Orientalism could be defined as one of three features: those possessing or the objects possessing these entities possessing these aspects or these features. Of course, some of them could intertwine or intersect. So a person could or an entity could clearly obtain two or three of these definitions. So anyone who teaches or researches the Orient, regardless of specialization, considered an Orientalist by Said, or it could be, or B, Orientalism could be a style of thought. So style of thought that differentiates, sees the West and the East as different blocks, differentiated in terms of knowledge, in terms of ontology, in terms of philology, in terms of culture, and so on. And it could be the apparatus or the economic entities that govern or help colonial occupation or colonial empowerment over colonial power over these formerly colonized people. So, like I said, it's a general, very vast or broad definition of what or be or who is an Orientalist, and you could see if, that although this definition was aimed at Orientalists at the age of colonialism, still Said still believes that till this day these features could be applied to those who continue to work with imperialist or imperialist powers such as the United States or China or Russia, for example, or it could also be on a smaller micro level, could be those who help establish, help legitimize the power grip of establishment entities such as universities, such as corporations, and so on. Imperialism, on the other hand, is connected obviously to colonialism, but Edward Said believes that imperialism is, while colonialism or Orientalism is the theoretical framework for occupying, colonizing a certain part of the world. Imperialism is the application of that belief, the application of those deeply believed theoretical frameworks, especially within Europe at that age. Postcolonialism, on the other hand, could be either theoretical or temporal. So could be the period, temporal period where and the spatial period where colonialism thrived, then declined within any part of the world, and could also refer to what Said helped establish, which is the event or the advent of post-colonial theory, which started arguably during the 1970s with the authorizing Said's authoring of Orientalism. Decolonization, of course, would be a form of the dismantling or opposing these kinds of colonial entities and their aftermath after the demise of colonialism, because people like Adu Said, he is of course highly skeptical of the term decolonization, but he believes that the artifacts, the frameworks, the apparatuses of that helped colonization of or colonialism to thrive and to dominate many parts of the world still lives on in the modern times. So before I go directly into narrative and discourse and how Said manages to balance their connections with power and hegemony and coercion and essentialism, I want quickly to address the fundamentals that Said positions himself theoretically within. So he has what Said did before going into narrating counter discourses and counter representation, counter interpretations, that he tried to formulate a position from where an alternative form of narrative could be produced. So he wanted to produce a counter narrative, but he also wanted to produce a textuality that was not that was far removed from the hegemonies and essentialism he associates with imperialism and Orientalism. So what he did is that he portrayed himself as a humanist. So what he tried to do is reformulate his position as that of a humanist who is not connected to any politically or ideologically to any form of collective power structure. So in this case, he would portray himself as a humanist who believes in high ideals and almost utopian ideals that connect humans throughout the world. What he tried to do is to build up a rubric for values that could be shared between different humans, and these ideals or these values would resemble the connecting apparatus rather than being forced to connect to coercive or monolithic forms of of control, as did or as occurred before in the age of colonialism. So he suggests that at its best, culture of opposition resistance suggests a theoretical alternative and a practical method for reconceiving human experience in non-imperialist terms. So he tried to formulate new models for human resistance and opposition to culturally and humanistically to those produced by imperialists and colonialists. So the idea for him was to reconstruct or refashion, as Neil Lazarus asserts, refashion himself once again as a humanist individual. So this idea of removing the self, removing the subject, the colonial subject or colonized subject from any form of collective hegemony would be for Said an essential part of his theorization. The conundrum, the issue, the contradiction would be that, as Lisa Lau indicates in the third quote, is that Reorientalism could be produced through this designation of post-colonial Orientalists who reproduce narratives and discourses and counter narratives and representations, but at the same time depend on power apparatuses that still exist in the West, such as academic centers, think tanks, universities. So she questions whether or not Said's affiliations and disaffiliations, humanistic affiliations and disaffiliations with power apparatuses and Western culture and Western democracy and Western metropolis centers could in fact be achieved, especially in the case of Edward Said, who he himself has always insisted that his position is that of a person who is deeply endowed or deeply indebted to Western culture and Western humanism, that of Adorno, Theodor Adorno, or Uberbach and Kant, among others. So that's the first position that Said tries to establish himself as an affiliative humanist who chooses where to position himself as an individual. So he would affiliate with a university or with a certain culture and or a certain ideology or a theory and so on. So this would be contrasted with his education, for example, with his intellectual background, as all of his education was, as he mentions in the first quote, is Western, and he does not shy from this fact. In all the schools he studied in Egypt, in Jazeera Preparatory School, or in St. George School in Jerusalem, and later on at 16 when he went to the United States and spent the rest of his life and joined there and joined a boarding school in Massachusetts, Connecticut. So the idea is that as these three quotations indicate, that Said tries to distance himself through affiliation, through humanism, from his entire formation, intellectual formation, as a Western scholar, as a Western American academic, and as someone who has been educated throughout his life in English and American curricula. And whether or not, as Sadiq Jalal al-Azm indicates, whether or not this could help avoid being contaminated with any form of Orientalism, or as as Jalal Azm calls it, Orientalism in reverse. When someone moves towards or situates or is rehoused within the West, whether Europe or Northern America. So Said, for example, describes Colombia as a utopian place, but he does not indicate that even universities, even liberal universities in the United States, could, on different levels and to a relative extent, exert pressures or influences on their academics, on their students, and could also govern what academics teach and research, and what students learn. So another locational rather than positional aspect that you say it utilizes in order to reinvent himself, reconstruct himself, is to describe himself as an exile. He is in actuality an exile, but what he tries to do is to reestablish what he calls as the executive force, or the executive value of exile. He describes in the third quote, he describes exile as both actual and metaphorical. Actual, as the case in his own experience when he was exiled from Palestine and was exiled to Egypt and later to America, and he could not acquire Palestinian nationality or live in Palestine. Or metaphorical, which he calls for all intellectuals to adapt. So a metaphorical exile is when an intellectual chooses to distance himself from all influences and all power apparatuses and all power structures. So an intellectual will choose to be associated with a government or an ideological movement, or a theory, or for example, in his case, an academic institution, but will also choose to be metaphorically distanced through exile. So he chooses to be in exile. Then he, after being exiled from that entity or that position or that theory, he could then reconstruct the aspect from that institution or that theory that suits him and suits his humanism. Of course, people like critics such as Ijaz Ahmed call this an ambivalent cosmopolitan location in the second quotation, because Said doing so, saying that you're constantly metaphorically exiled, would also mean that there is no location for the intellectual or the subject. So it's difficult to establish whether a certain intellectual, a certain academic is connected to this political movement or that theoretical position, because he would be extensively flexible in his associations. He would choose to, whenever someone criticizes this metaphorically exiled intellectual of being connected to this institution, he would say that he's in actuality exiled from it, but he's connected through affiliation or through his humanistic choice rather than being completely or rigidly fixed to this entity and all of what it resembles, um, whether implicitly or explicitly. So as Timothy Brennan describes it, it's moving from the location to the position. So rather than being fixed to a certain location, a certain metropolitan center, a certain country, a certain institution, one chooses to position himself, chooses what suits him culturally, ideologically, and theoretically, and positions himself through the medium of exile. So he removes himself by choice from that entity, and then chooses where to position his loyalties and his theories and so on. So at the bottom of there, you see the last quotation said speaks of exile not as just as a privilege, but as an alternative to mass institution that dominate modern life. So he doesn't want that form of mass institutions where universities and governments and political association ideologies and so on could govern a certain individual's life and govern what the path or that he should adhere to, should follow, and those that are prohibited. So we can see that on this page. We can see that what Said tried to do is establish an intellectual that is not compromised like the compromise experienced by European scholars and scientists at the age of colonialism. He says that in a very broad and surprising quote, he says that therefore correct that every European in what he could say about the Orient was consequently racist and imperialist and almost totally ethnocentric. Some of the immediate sting will be taken out of these labels if we recall additionally that human societies, at least more advanced cultures, have rarely offered the individual anything but imperialism, racism, ethnocentrism to dealing with other cultures. So he says that if one completely follows a culture or any form of a power apparatus, the result would be that other cultures, other beliefs, other ideologies would be seen as lesser, inferiors in one way or another, and saying that helped Said try to put into logic his own theory of trying to be removed from and culture and any form of personal or collective affiliation, preferring instead to be affiliated rather than affiliated to what an individual was born with. So he also tries to establish an idea of individuality, where the individual, rather than the collective, governs what the intellectual is able to establish or is able to uh, uh, describe himself or ascribe himself, whether theories or positions or narratives. So this independence, this supposed independence, is what Said strives for. It's trying to be independent through exile, through affiliation, and through an idea of being removed from any form of ideology. So a cosmopolitan intellectual is what Said strives for, uh, being exiled, being metaphorically and constantly exiled from all forms of collectiveness. So the individual, the humanistic individual, is the main goal for Said, and this marginality or this outsiderness offers the individual a chance to go back and choose what is appropriate and what suits him, like I mentioned, theoretically and ideologically and humanistically. The idea, of course, is would be to give the individual the subjective and individual power to uh, position himself rather than being uh, all of his positions, rather than all of his positions and beliefs and theoretical frameworks being superimposed by collective or by collectives or institutions. Uh, this, of course, is correct for Said as a Western individual who writes in the from the West, but as you can see, he considers himself an Oriental. He doesn't consider himself as a Western writer or a Western theorist. He considers himself as someone who was formerly colonized, and he's an Oriental, and he's writing back to Orientalists who deformed, misrepresented, and stifled colonized narratives from ever forming. So this is my main aim, is to try to question this position, whether it's possible for someone to be an Oriental within the West and attack the West and its Orientalists from within a metropolis center, and through and in the process using all of the power apparatuses and all of the methodologies available for Orientalists themselves. So being in universities, using exposure, using media. So all of the things that Orientalists used to govern and use or misuse are available now for Orientals who live in the West. So this is the main issue I wish to tackle, which is the possibility or the impossibility of such a theory that an Oriental is able to cultivate the methodologies available in the West in order to deconstruct and dismantle its power apparatuses. Universality is another feature where an individual uses or say calls for humanistic universal values and ideals, like I mentioned before, but he doesn't, as he mentions in the second quote, he doesn't call for or doesn't favor an abstract form of universalism, but what he calls for is a universalism that is governed by humanism. The problem, of course, is that he says that abstract universalism values of whoever is in power, but saying that humanistic values of universalism does not take away this fact. So an imperialist or an Orientalist would still say that his ideals, his values are humanistic, are correct, and it's impossible to find that agreed upon universalism within all of intellectuals. So as the Arif Derlich in the third quote indicates correctly indicates, Edward Said is an intellectual of many paradoxes. His work over the last 3 decades has articulated the most cogent and sustained critiques of Eurocentrism, and yet he retains an intellectual and personal commitment to the values of European humanism and products of its high culture. So he always mentions that his education and his all of his theories are dependent upon the West, and even his preferences are with conservative culture, whether in music, whether in arts, and even in literature. So he rarely mentions or studies uh, uh, novels or any form of literature that is not produced within the West, especially or particularly within Europe. So uh, the idea is that this universality is theoretically viable, but in reality, it's impossible to find such universality, because if such a universality of any ideal is imposed or superimposed, it would mean that it's universality of the most powerful. Otherwise, it's impossible that to find an agreed upon universality where all the values of all of the individuals or intellectuals, whether in the East or the West, could be agreed upon, and that such a dilemma would mean that either one tries to find individualized universalism, and in this case, it would not be a universalism, or either the other choice would be to superimpose it through power apparatuses, and this would be contradictory, of course. So this is the idea, is that Said uh, tries to cultivate affiliation and exile and intellectual independence, and all of these factors in order to uh, establish his position, his positionality, in order to reproduce narratives within the cosmopolitan metropolis in the West, in New York in his case, and reconstruct uh, counter narratives, counter discourses, and counter representations in order to depose supposedly undisputed facts and objective truths that were established by Orientalists about the East, for instance, or about Palestine, or about the Middle East. So, among all of Edward Said's counterposition arguments, discursivity has a prominence and constantly recurs. He viewed it as a means by which subordination is imposed and equally emancipation may be achieved. So it's possible to subordinate people using um, narrative and to deprive them from the ability to express and represent themselves. But it's also possible to achieve emancipation and achieve uh, uh, higher values and ideals through the same medium, and this is why Say tries to cultivate uh, uh, this methodology, so to speak. He in such an endeavor, Said relied heavily or almost entirely on Michel Foucault. Michel Foucault is one of the major influences, of course, on Edward Said. But what Said did is that he took his Foucault's ideas on how language, how lingo and narrative and discourse is able to control and be under the control of whoever is in power, and how there's a how narrative and discourse is always connected, um, and and further become further coercive and hegemonic through its association with power. So what Saud tried to do is take that theory of the coercion between or the intertwined relationship between power and hegemony and coercion and narrative, and tried to extend it. So I'll speak quickly about Foucault, because he has a huge theory on narrative, of course, which was gathered by Colin Gordon and especially in discipline and punishment. So Foucault, the idea that Foucault presented was that all of discourse is connected to power, and all of power and all of knowledge is also connected to power. And this would mean that what people are able to write or receive is only what is permitted by these power apparatuses. So the system of power, these apparatuses are in full control of narrative. Whatever any individual receives or produces is only governed and through different forms of power apparatuses, whether social, whether cultural, whether linguistic, whether ideological, and so on. And Foucault believes that it's possible to move beyond the realms of these power apparatuses. The consequence would be, as the second quote reveals, is that if all of truth and knowledge and narrative is controlled, and discourse and narrative are controlled and voted by and stifled and limited by whoever is in power, this would mean that it's not complete, and the result would be, or the logical consequence would be, that all narrative is distortion at some level, because it does not reveal the full extent of reality or the full extent of truth. Truth as truthful narratives produced by people is impossible, because it's impossible to produce any form of completeness. And this incompleteness in Foucault's estimation is an indication of lack of credibility at some level, because the things omitted or prohibited in a narrative or a discourse could be the most essential parts of that narrative, and they were prohibited, for example, by culture, by ideology, or the likes. This generalization was taken aboard or taken on board by Saud, and Saud extended it towards, or tried to apply it to his ideals or his theories concerning Orientalism and colonialism, saying that all of the narrative that were produced by scientists, sociologists, anthropologists, and novelists and so on was curtailed, was controlled by colonialism and imperialism, and this would mean that they all forms of distortion at one level or another. And also he said extended his Foucault's views through stating that truth is difficult to obtain or convey between individuals or collectives, as it is always connected with power, and this would mean that it's a matter of choice whether this power apparatus or this powerful individual is able to release or confine certain aspect of that narrative. So colonialism would, for example, would always establish or portray the colonial European individual subject as superior to any individual within the colonized locations or nations, and an opposite or that disputes this fact would not be accepted in any form or in any magnitude. So the idea would be that factuality and truth would always be disputed, and if truth and knowledge and objectivity is uh, uh, distorted by power, this would have huge consequences for Said in his narrative later on, because if truth is indeed unavailable or limited or relatively distorted, and the same goes for truth or any form of statement. This would also mean that counter narratives, alternative narratives produced by colonial subjects such as Said, or Orientals such as Said, would also bear the same characteristics he associates with colonialists and imperialists and Orientalists, if he agrees with Foucault, as we'll see later on. So, like I said, it's the idea of being connected to power that Said and Foucault find disturbing and contaminating. So, what Said would try to do is uh, based on the foundations I mentioned before, exile and affiliation and humanism, is try to establish a new form of narrative, which could use narrative, but disassociate this narrative with any form of power apparatus through exile and 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 affiliation and humanism. And we'll see that this kind of ideal is impossible to implement in reality, because if all of or most of or any form of narrative or knowledge or truth or objectivity is constantly curtailed by power and constantly governed and coerced and and used by these power apparatuses of powerful individuals. This would also apply to counter narratives produced by Orientals, because it's impossible to envisage that any individual is able to produce any form of narrative unless he has a certain level of power over that narrative, and a certain level of belief in that what he says is objective or truthful. Otherwise, all statements would be accepted, and Said's quest in order to reproduce a substitute or alternative representation is futile and useless, because if he says that if he tries to provide an alternative correct uh, representation of Palestine, for example, like the one he did in Blaming the Victims, where he provides, along with many other authors, uh, factual information about Palestine, then he would definitely believe that what he says is correct, and what he's trying to replace is distorting or incorrect uh, uh, or false at some level. Otherwise, like I said, they all statements would be, if someone considered that all language, all or narrative or discourse is on the same level concerning truthfulness and objectivity, this would mean that there's no need to replace any statement with another as all forms of on the same level of truthfulness. So what I try to do is provide a few two or three examples of what I mean when I say that Said found it difficult to produce counter narratives that are different to what he criticizes in Orientalism or or colonialism or he associates with these apparatuses. And for example, if we look at if we look at one of his books where he uh, views in blaming the victims, for instance, where he tries to, like I said, provide a huge array of information. The book itself was written as an offshoot of an article or many articles written about Palestine in the West. So Said took it on his own shoulders to try to reproduce a book which is written by himself and many other academics, mostly American and European academics. And the book was printed within the West, and it was, as Said himself indicates, it was a book that Said tries to indicate through this book or this narrative is what he tried to indicate through this narrative is that it's possible for an individual who is Oriental but who is located in the West to produce counter narratives. The dilemma, the conundrum, as I mentioned before, is that he completely depends on Western media and Western publishing houses and Western exposure, and he also tries to, as he mentions in the books, he's trying to address the Western readership. So his whole project was enabled, made available, and was enabled at the same time by his position within the West, because he says that Palestinians have a huge amount of narratives, but it doesn't reach the West. But ironically, he cultivates his position in the West as an academic in a prestigious institution in order to reestablish his reproduce counter narratives. So he uses the methodologies he criticizes Orientalists for in order to produce counter narratives. The same goes for covering Islam, where he tries to produce, as he mentions in the book, tries to produce an alternative narrative and deploys it toward. It's also directed at West, and he deploys it and towards Western readership, and he uses and at the same time he uses and cultivates his position, because he at that time he has conducted a huge amount of interviews in order to publicize this book and publicize his opinions. And he mentions that in the book itself, saying that television and radio at that time helped him immensely in order to extend and make his voice heard within the. So this is this is the idea that I'm trying to, because of time, I'll just try to discuss this idea of how representation, how narrative, how and how discourse is able to be is possible, is only possible, or sometimes enhanced through methodologies found by institutions that are hegemonic, that are monolithic, that are controlling, such as academic institutions, such as think tanks, such as even political connections or political positions. My final point is about, after the last sky, the whole book is about representation, and Saud mentions that all as the quotation in the middle mentions, all representation is misrepresentation of one sort or another. But again, he mentions at the beginning of the book that the whole book is aimed at providing an alternative representation between quotation marks directed at the West. So the book itself has a huge array of photographs accompanied with his commentary that is directed towards Western leadership. The question would be, and I'll end with this question, is whether or not Saud, being an author who authored and published this book in New York about Palestinians, about especially Palestinians in refugee camps, whether or not he is able to produce a narrative or a discourse that is not stifling or coercive or hegemonic towards the Palestinians or Palestinian refugees, because in all respects he is considered to be, in terms of his location and position and tools and methodologies available to him, in a higher, more powerful location than any of them. It would be impossible or very difficult for any of them to dispute any of the facts that he mentions, as was the case with Orientalists. Thank you very much, and I'll leave the microphone for Dr.
Thank you, Dr. Majed, for that very interesting talk.